Okay, I think we're finished with the cheesy music. So if everyone could take their seats, this is the real meat and potatoes part of the day. It's GDPR preparedness with some real practical examples. But to guide you through that, we have Bojana Bellamy, President of Hunton and Williams Centre for Information Policy Leadership. Bojana, thank you very much.
Wonderful. So, hi everybody. Hello. Please come in because this was really bad idea. You've now escaped, and I only have 10 minutes to tell you what I think about GDPR preparedness. Really delighted to be here. I was here last year. It's wonderful to be able to partner with the Nordic Privacy Arena and Data Protection Forum. As Mark has said today, we have to talk together, and I think it's so important that we get a chance to speak to people in Scandinavia, in Nordic countries as well, and really learn from you as well and share some of the experiences. We in Europe do not speak enough with each other. So what I'd like to talk about as the beginning of this panel, and then we're going to have some discussion, is to sort of talk about GDPR readiness and preparedness, and also looking at GDPR as potentially opportunity as well as some challenge. And very briefly, you know that we at CIPL have launched a project on GDPR implementation and interpretation. We are working with about 85, almost 90 organizations around Europe, data protection authorities. We've been writing a lot on each point that Working Party 29 has published guidance. We've written papers and documents. Please go to our website. You've got it there. All these papers are published. They're free. They're available for everybody to draw from. And I'm saying you this because I think it's so important that we start seeing this GDPR as a one law, one set of rules that is interpreted and seen in the same way. I know we are not quite all the same in Europe, but we have to start seeing things the same way. And frankly, the data protection authorities will have to do this as well. As part of our GDPR implementation project, we have asked our project participants to tell us what they felt were the most imminent challenges around GDPR. What are the areas that they are going to be focusing on? And again, if you go to our website, you have a full paper on that. But just here, I want to share with you some of these, what I call overarching challenges and imperatives that our CIPL members and also organizations who work with us in GDPR project have told us. The first one is something that we will touch upon later in the afternoon. We are going to be discussing with DPAs their own role. And the first point we have heard is we really need DPAs to tango with us. It takes two to make success of GDPR, organizations who are accountable, responsible, and comply, but DPAs who are effective, who are well-resourced, and also adopt risk-based approach as well to enable this digital single market, and who are also consistent in their interpretation. The second point we heard, again to Mark's point earlier this morning, we really need constructive engagement between industry and data protection regulators. That has to be a two-way discussion. And there is a lot still to play, a lot still to develop with the GDPR, and we need these voices, we need people talking together. And of course, civil society, very, very important. The third point is harmonization. It is absolutely essential that we, as much as possible, have one set of rules across Europe. And as you know, member states still have got quite a lot of margin of maneuver, and they're using this margin of maneuver quite a lot as well. And so how are we going to be having digital single market? How are we going to have one set of rules? If I was a company that deals with children and produce Angry Birds app, how do I know where my users are coming from so I can obtain different consent at different age? And you know, we're not going to get this. So I'm putting a plea on you that you should be really working with your governments and member states to make sure as much as possible we are sharing views, sharing experiences, so we end up with the same, as much as same as possible, member state implementation. How do we work with other laws? E-privacy regulation, not a problem, but big issue that we have to think about. How does GDPR interact with this? What about the NIS directive? What about the payments directive? There's so many other areas of law. So how does that work with GDPR as well? And then final 2 points is the need for guidance. Now that is a really difficult one, because I kind of think sometimes we as accountable organizations have to take our own view. We have to push because we know how we should comply, rather than just always wait for the guidance from regulators. Guidance from regulators is helpful, but on the other hand, they can't be producing this all the time for us. We have to be responsible We have to be accountable. And so therefore, the guidance that is coming from Working Party 29, I hope is going to be dynamic, and we have asked for it to be evolving, to be dynamic, as opposed to once alone. And then, of course, Brexit. I think somebody else is going to talk about Brexit. Otherwise, I get really very much, what is the word? Passionate, even more passionate about it. But we can take that in questions. Now, here I really want to share with you some of what I think are the strategic areas, you can't see these slides, but strategic areas to focus for organizations that they should be thinking about as they are implementing GDPR, but also thinking beyond and above GDPR. My friends, nothing is going to change on 25th of May. You will not know on 26th that we have GDPR. It's going to be an ongoing process, and we have to keep doing this all the time. And so it really, if we think that this is just a one-off project, well, it is not. First important point is that, as you know, GDPR requires us to be accountable, to have a privacy management program, and that accountability, that comprehensive privacy program with all of its elements, has to be led by data protection officer, has to be verified. You have to know that what you say is what you do. You have to be able to demonstrate. If somebody knocks on your door, if your board wants to ask you, what are you doing about privacy? Because I have heard I'm going to have liabilities if you mess up. And that's what it means. So that's the areas you should be really thinking very strategically about. Do I have a comprehensive privacy program that is going to be able to demonstrate to the regulators, to my shareholders, to my internal management that we are doing what we say we would do? Really important. Second point, data transfer strategy. Now, nothing has changed. I have said this last year. We all share data globally, and it's not getting any easier. It's getting more complicated, more legalistic, and more challenging, and there's more legal uncertainty. And therefore, you have to consider, where is my data? Who is touching my data? Is it crossing borders? Where are my service providers? What's my strategy for privacy compliance around data transfers? And I know it's not easy. I know model contracts are being challenged as well, but we need to find a way forward. We cannot stop data sharing just when something else happens as well. The third area of focus is data strategy. And what I mean by that is, and you have heard it this afternoon, companies are using data, but there's nothing wrong about that. Data can be used and can be used responsibly. So how are you going to use your GDPR to actually support your data strategy? How are you going to use your GDPR to tick all the boxes so you can do data sharing, you can do big data in a way that is responsible? If you click sort of that box, if you manage to solve that problem, you are going to be very popular in your organization. As our friend from Rovia said, it is important to actually be relevant for our business. Privacy impact assessment and risk management is another area of focus. I've talked about this a lot in the past. We still haven't sussed how to do this well. There are tools out there, there's frameworks, but we have to be able to understand what is the risks and harms of our projects, our products, our services, as and when we launch them. So do we have a framework which is consistent? Do we think DPAs see the risks in the same way as we do? And I think that's something that in all organizations we're going to have to keep developing more and more. Privacy engineers, you have heard about them. Those are people who are going to help us embed privacy in our products and services. It means privacy is going to be everybody's job, not just privacy officers' job. Literally everybody has to know about it. So how are we going to explain these requirements in a way that our coders and technology developers understand? And how are we going to work with them continuously so this is not an aftermath? So we can say privacy is a part of our DNA. Vendor management. Huge changes. I don't know. I mean, it's boring. But you know what? Processors have got very different responsibilities under GDPR. And we as controllers have to also think what our relationship looks like, what our contracts look like, how we're doing due diligence. And nothing is going to change. I think this is going to be a big area of focus. I was, for example, at a meeting in Berlin where one of a major outsourcing service providers with 220,000 people globally invited their top leadership of the clients to listen about GDPR and their own readiness about GDPR. Like, that's how processors should be behaving, right? That's what you should be asking your processors to do. Are you up to speed with GDPR? And when I'm using you, are you going to help me with my compliance as well? And that's, again, strategic for both sides. Individual rights complaints and disputes. I had to add disputes there because I fear we're going to see more of that. When I said nothing is going to change on 26th of May, I think something will change. I think we're going to see people who will be exercising their rights more openly, more freely, not just because we have privacy advocates doing that for us, but I think people will be listening about the new rights under GDPR. When Costea judgment came out by Google, people were sending requests to everybody. I have right to be forgotten, take me off. Well, no, you don't actually. This is a very different right to what you think you have. So, we need to be ready as well to receive requests from individuals about things that perhaps they think they have, but they don't. Specifically around data portability, I would say, and right to be forgotten. So you have to be ready to think, how am I going to preempt people sending me requests which really mean nothing? How am I going to educate my own customers, my own citizens, my own people about what rights they really have? And then how am I going to respond to these rights? Because there'll be many more of them, I reckon. And we will have privacy advocates. We haven't had that yet in Europe, and I keep talking about it all the time. But you've seen Finn Murstrad from Norwegian Consumer Council, don't know where he is. And we're going to have more people like that who are going to be challenging organizations in public and private sector on their privacy policies, on their uses of data. And we have to be ready to deal and understand their point of view before, frankly, we launch something. So maybe the question is, do I want to engage with privacy advocacy community in advance of me launching a big project? Maybe that's not such a bad idea after all. We never did that, but I'm telling you, that's the shift change that we're going to see under GDPR. Breach management, okay, we know it's going to happen to everybody, but do we have policies and procedures to deal with the breaches, to report them internally, to know that they have happened, to review them, and then to notify regulators and individuals, and then deal with the aftermath of that? And you know that we have launched, last year we actually did a survey on GDPR readiness, and this was an interesting one where lots of companies felt they had procedures in place, but nobody has done a dry run, a tabletop exercise. They haven't still hired their lawyers, they still haven't hired the forensic firms or perhaps communication and media companies. Now that all has to be ready by 25th of May. We have to have this process completely lined up and tested so that when there is a breach after GDPR comes into force, our machinery can come in and hopefully we will prevent the breach. But if it does happen, and it will happen, then we know how to deal with it. And then final point, also around data protection engagement and relationship. This is hugely important. I'll mention this a little bit later, but not just in the context of one-stop shop in Europe, but overall, our privacy officers have to be ready to engage with these data protection authorities in a really different and constructive dialogue. Now, one of the things that I have noticed as we talk to companies and we did our global survey, and by the way, we are doing the survey again. It's just probably open for another 2 weeks. Please just go on our website, and it's totally anonymous, but tell us what your GDPR preparedness looks like. We have 300 plus companies already responded. We'd like some more as well, and then we'll issue a report, and we share that with DPAs and the Commission. And one of the things that I have noticed is a year ago, many companies were not using compliance tools, technologies, software to help them with compliance. I'm delighted to see outside there a number of vendors now available for us. But that means that we in privacy have to be able to demand our companies for the same resources, the same money, just like our CIO and IT department have. They've got tons of money to implement whatever it is that they need to do. We need the same money to actually implement some of these privacy software tools and solutions to help us with privacy compliance. Data protection impact assessments are an obvious one. Data classification and tagging. Records of processing, the infamous Article 30, and of course delivery of data portability, right? Finn told you today there isn't quite a click where I can move my data from one telco to another or from one energy supplier to another. But where else can technology help? And this is, I'm kind of saying this so to get you to think about and to get our vendors to try to help us. Rights of access, maybe we can just organize that so that I can click easily and say I want to see data you have about me. Consent management and withdrawals of consent, again, that has to be much more dynamic. You have seen the guidance from the Information Commissioner's Office, draft guidance. We haven't seen Working Party 29, but they are seeing this as a much more dynamic and evolving process where consents can't be asked at the beginning, but perhaps as we go along in our relationship. And same with privacy transparency, dashboards, apps about privacy, videos, we heard all about that. And finally, how do you demonstrate that you have a privacy program? Can tools help us with that as well? Otherwise, we'll just be buried in tons of paper. My strategic point here is something I have said already before, but just to remind you, I think there are really opportunities in GDPR to switch it from, this is a compliance burden, this is a legal obligation, but actually this can enable us to do something better. First of all, we can be better around using data responsibly because our business models, our digitalization, innovation, dare I say, although I hear nobody likes that word, but I think there is a lot of innovation based on data, are going to only take place if we are able to leverage the data responsibly. So if we say to our leadership, that's my role as data privacy officer, to help us do this thing, to realize business objectives, then we're going to become much more popular. And the same in the public sector as well. The second point, if we use GDPR to say that, in fact, this is about trust, this is about addressing increased concerns that people have about their use of data, and to ensure that they do participate and they do understand the value of what we are doing and providing to them, well, then that becomes a very different discussion. And we are starting to see this discussion. Business leaders in some companies I work with are really seeing this as an opportunity. And it isn't run by legal department. It's actually run by somebody who wants to use this and then develop their business strategy and trust and digital enablement. The third point, I talked about data sustainability. I always say data is not oil, it's actually like environment. You really have to protect and nurture it, and that's what GDPR is all about. It actually does help you nurture something that you really think is important for you. And then finally, yes, of course, if you do this, you will probably address regulatory change, you will probably address your commercial risks, your legal risks, and overall enterprise risk as well. So looking at it like that, it becomes much more of an enabler as opposed to compliance task, 4% fine, scaremongering among your organization. And final point is this. Data protection authorities, I know some are in the room and we'll have a discussion about this afternoon. I think GDPR is going to bring big change to DPAs as well. And we must not underestimate that as well. They will have to be effective, they will have to be setting strategic priorities and well-resourced because GDPR has about 50-something tasks of DPAs. They should also, in my view, adopt risk-based approach. That means focus on areas where there's the highest and biggest risks and harms to individuals versus technical compliance. Have you included all items of Article 13 in your privacy notice? Well, honestly, if you have forgotten to tell who you are, that's like much less important than if you messed up the application that collects sensitive data and that's being now accessed on internet by everybody. Like there is a difference, right? Third, I think the DPAs will have to learn to think internationally as well as nationally, and this is a big change. And here we are in Nordic region, right? We've got all of the DPAs here, but the world is really much flatter than even Europe. And so we need to understand how others operate. There has to be more trust, cooperation, better consistency and uniformity around how DPAs see GDPR. And I know they're doing huge effort in this respect at Working Party 29 because this transformational change from DPA national to the board, I think is a huge one. And then final point that I really feel passionate about is that it is absolutely essential that there is transparency in how the board works, how the decisions are made, how this cooperation, consistency, procedure looks like, because there's no such thing as Swedish decision anymore. If there are people who are impacted by somebody who makes an app in Sweden but sells it or uses it across the Europe, that's a cross-border processing, that will affect people outside Sweden, and therefore that might go to the board and through cooperation consistency procedure. And that is really, and if that happens, we need to know how the process goes. What is the what happens? What are the timelines? How can we have representation? How can we have engagement? But even before that, and this is my last point I really want you to leave with, I think it's so important that as we talk about accountable organization, we also talk about effective regulators, that they really engage in this, what I call constructive dialogue, constructive engagement, with the help of others. And there are many others. Civil society is there, some political and market forces will be impacting that engagement, data protection officers, of course, redress schemes as well. But this is really where we are going to be crafting this new future. It's not going to happen by anyone actually levying 4% fines. It's only going to be happening by incentivizing best behaviors and getting the market to behave in the best possible way. And we have actually launched a piece of work, and we've just published that at the International Commissioners Conference, calling Regulating for Results, where we are calling for these new effective DPAs who are understanding what creates the best outcomes and are behaving in that way, and then asking for accountable organizations to engage in this constructive dialogue. And there's some interesting ideas there, which we might have a chance to talk about this afternoon, such as regulatory sandbox. And that means, like in financial services, maybe some organizations are able to experiment, to create products and services together with the DPA feedback, so that when it goes in the market, actually it is done very well. Reiterative compliance, you can't get it right every time, but you're going to get it right and keep improving because somebody's giving you a feedback. So with that, I'm going to leave you now. I'm going to open the floor to our panelists, and my first question is going to be, does this sound rubbish, or do you recognize some of your own behaviors and some of your own challenges? And ladies and gentlemen, today with us we have got a group of three privacy officers from industry. With me we've got Sony Mobile, Cisco and Cry, and they will briefly introduce themselves. And then we've got Paul Bradbright, who also he was a DPA but now has crossed over to working for Nimity, and he will be giving us some comments from his perspective as well. So please quickly introduce your roles and then answer my question: how is this all gibberish, or does this resonate with your organizations as well?
Well, Mario Skimonos, Privacy Program Manager for Sony Mobile, responsible for development of products and services. No, it sounds very familiar. And in fact, some of the challenges you pointed out is quite the challenges we face in the implementation of that GDPR program. We come from a company that is a small Google meter, so we have a number of operating units that have their own privacy policies, their own compliance initiatives, different programs. So when it comes to GDPR, we wanted to harmonize it to a more common standard. And this became quite a big challenge, as much as complying with the GDPR itself. So yeah, quite familiar points in your presentation. Thank you.
Lorena?
So I'm Lorena Marciano. I'm a DMIA Privacy Officer for Cisco. That really sounds very much like what we are doing internally. So what you've discussed in terms of investing in international transfer mechanism at Cisco, as you know, we are not only Privacy Shield certified, we're also looking at globally to privacy. That's one of the things I wanted to make in point, is that as a company, since we're a global organization, we're not only looking at GDPR itself, we're going to make it work globally. Because whether we can think of GDPR as a starting point, what we're seeing is a global trend. And the global trends tell us that it's all going to converge in the main principles that are outlined in GDPR, but frankly have been outlined for a very long time. Who's been in the business, like me and you guys, for a very long time, you know that GDPR is nothing really new. It adds a bit more, but it's not really new. And so as a global company, we're looking at more from a global perspective. That to say that we're investing severely on international transfer mechanisms with the Privacy Shield, applying for BCRs and CBPR, but we also have an extensive data protection program that looks at all the elements that you just outlined, Bojana. So from vendor management to privacy policy and mapping of our internal systems and products to the effort on privacy engineering.
And we'll talk about privacy engineering. Carl, what about a different company, I suppose startup, SME size?
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, we're a little bit a contrast here. We're a smaller company, less than 100 people. And since we work in healthcare, data and privacy issues has been one top priority since the first day. So I work as the head of security. So my responsibilities covers both like the IT security and the information security sides. So for us, the GDPR has not been as much of this like big scary monster that it's often painted out to be, but actually quite an enabler, since we currently are operating in 3 different European markets, and of course looking to go into more. And healthcare is a field with a lot of rules and regulation, and they are different for each country. So this harmonization we're getting with the GDPR is actually a big opportunity for us, because it enable us to create one model that we can apply for all of our different target markets.
And tell us a little bit, because I think people know what Sony Mobile and Cisco do. Tell us what is your health product? What is your main product?
So we at Kry, we do online healthcare. So you have video meetings with doctors in your phone. So you book a meeting and you get to see a doctor within like 15 minutes instead of going away to a physical healthcare clinic. And this way we can handle about 2/3 of the cases that a normal physical primary care clinic could handle. So we're really making healthcare more efficient and accessible to all people.
And probably saving the big health budget as well.
Yes, though the critics try to paint out something else, but yes, this is of course a really...
We need him in England, by the way, in Britain, because our NHS system is totally collapsing. So please come.
Yeah.
Paul, you work with lots of companies in your new role at Nimity. And what are you sort of seeing? What are some of the main... first of all, what I'm saying, is that what you're seeing as well? And if not, what else are you seeing?
No, it is a lot of what we're seeing, actually, Bojana. One of the things that struck me was your remark on guidance in relation to accountability. And Nimity, being a company that works with a lot of organizations on accountability and demonstrating compliance, we've advocated actually for a long time that organizations shouldn't wait for guidance, but as the late Joe Alhadeff called it, document what's currently undocumented. You all have a lot of policies and procedures in your organization about how to deal with data, but not everybody is aware that these are also linked to a privacy policy, to a data protection program within an organization. And if you start looking carefully about what is going on in organizations, there is actually a lot already there to build that privacy program. About the guidance, of course, I was a member of the Article 29 Working Party, and I know that everybody is complaining that it has taken so long for the Working Party to agree on these documents. But try to reach agreement with 28 countries, plus the European Commission, plus the EDPS around the table, coming from all cultural backgrounds across Europe in all languages. That takes time, unfortunately. But you don't need to wait for the guidance. The GDPR allows the accountability approach. It allows organizations to make their own decisions about what they believe is right, but be ready to demonstrate why you've made certain decisions, how you have made certain decisions, so that you can indeed convince the DPA when they come to call.
One of the, and this is a question for all of you, one of the criticism of GDPR has been, okay, we all believe in accountability, and it is absolutely the right thing to have responsible organization with privacy management program, but we're going to be just buried by sort of compliance checks and accountability for the sake of accountability. So how do we, do you feel this is fair? How do you sort of do the accountability, which goes beyond really just ticking the box? We haven't prepared this question. That's why they're looking at me thinking, why are you asking me this tough question?
Well, I think I can go. Yeah.
Come on, Marius.
Yeah. Training, I think, is an enabler. Training, getting the people accountable, not micromanaging the teams, giving them the tools to start determining if the data they collect is personal or not. That helps a lot, I think, because it fosters a relationship with the data directly from the team. once it's personal, they understand that in a program there are certain regulations, responsibilities that we need to fulfill. And you are there to coach them, to help them, to learn from them, because there are new technologies all the time that you need to be educated upon, and work with them to come up with solutions and hopefully achieve what is called privacy by design. So, yeah, training and working with the teams.
I think training and on larger scales gives tools that they can use on the, to help get there, right? So as you said, it's a matter of accountability. It's a matter of keeping your household clean. And in order to do that, you need to ensure that you have tools in your company that any group, any focus group can use, and fill it in and come back for assessment to the privacy group, and then go back for remediation. So training, I would say, and also tools to actually help the privacy team, the T people, to actually get the thing right and have that household in order in case someone comes in and asks for questions.
So did you have to build, specifically at Cisco, did you have to build some new data privacy impact assessments or privacy by design checklists or tools to do that?
Well, two things. Yeah, we do have a privacy assessment, of course, as a starting point. We're actually doing what we call a privacy engineering effort, which is really to educate, which starts with education first, so with our engineers understand what privacy is all about and what are the requirements. And then we have, are leveraging something that we have within our security, and we're working for a very long time, which is a security development life cycle. What that means? It means that any offers that needs to be launched into the market needs to be screened for security requirements, and now we have included in those security requirements also the privacy requirements. It's a list of requirements that they need to keep in mind at the design moment, and then we test them before launch. And then we follow through in case there are new features added to it.
So in some ways what you're saying, you're leveraging existing processes to add the privacy component, so it becomes less...
Yeah, exactly. And that's one of the tips that I give also when people ask us, how do we do it? And I think Paul mentioned that. Start from what you have. Start leveraging what you have in your company, and start with that process and trying to leverage to get the GDPR right. That's what we have done personally.
Carl, how does this look in a small organization? More agile?
Yeah. So I think we're taking a very pragmatic approach to the whole thing, and this, like privacy by design, as you mentioned, is something really a mindset that we are working with. Like every time we're we want to store or process some kind of data, we always ask ourselves like, why? Can we motivate this? And actually, up until recently, we destroyed a lot of data continuously because we didn't really feel confident yet to keep this data. So it was not until we felt that we had the right procedures to work with this data that we actually started storing this data and doing like analysis and stuff like that. So I think the privacy by design and always like questioning is like, why are we storing this data and what are we going to do with this? That's like, we take it from that approach, and so we've been working from the perspective of like, what are we doing? And maybe the focus has not been so much actually on like the actual compliance parts of it. It's more like we're building something that we feel that we really can motivate and defend, and now we're getting into phase where we are like building like formalizing the processes and documentation around what we've already built that we feel confident with.
But there's nothing wrong actually which way you go. You can kind of either go bottom up, which is what you do. You build something and then you document how you do it, or you can go top down, which is here is what we should do, and then we do it that way. I think both ways are fine as long as you are able to come to a story if somebody knocks on your door. Be it big, be it small. Sometimes maybe it's easier to be small because you have only some things to think about versus these two who have tons of applications.
Yes, exactly. I discussed this with someone yesterday, and I said that I'm in the luxurious position that I could, I think I could draw like all our data, all our processes on one whiteboard from the top of my head right now. So
they are records of processing, really easy.
But may I add an interesting point? When you work with the teams, and some of them get better in privacy over the years, and they can prepare well in advance. They actually thought about the controls they should put in place, and you're having a review, And then, GDPR now puts this requirement for documentation. So I found myself recently just taking notes of everything they have done to document it in the review, even if I didn't have to actually give them any requirements. And that I thought is an interesting perspective. GDPR made me a little bit more defensive in my strategy to try to keep a record of what they have done, which I wouldn't have done 2 years ago. So interesting side effects when you see the teams getting better.
Well, of course, it is always a challenge for large organizations like Cisco and Sony with a lot of legacy systems and a lot of legacy data to document all that. And I think that is where startups nowadays have a clear advantage to deal with those 39 articles in the GDPR that really require organizations to demonstrate compliance. I think, especially for the larger ones, Lorena already mentioned it, things like binding corporate rules are actually not only a good step towards more data transfers or easier data transfers, but also a great step into the world of compliance, because that already requires you to update all your policies and procedures to show what you are doing, to be able to explain it not only internally but also externally. And at Nimity we believe that that is also a way forward. One of the things I'm looking into on behalf of the company is whether there is a possibility to certify not only a product or a service, but also a full privacy program. And that certainly won't be something that will be largely available on 25 May, if only because we need to wait for decisions from the Commission and the European Data Protection Board, which can't be taken until the GDPR is in full force. But I do believe that a few years from now, it is a very important step.
And that is really an interesting point. One of the things I had there was about how can you demonstrate accountability. Certainly you can demonstrate by having a accountable privacy program based on elements of accountability. You can do it through binding corporate rules. And I, like Paul, and I'm interested in your view as well, Lorena, because I know you've got BCR. I also believe that BCR is actually more than just a data transfer mechanism. You need a program behind it, and that is actually a compliance program. There is, of course, certifications, which we haven't discussed, but I think tomorrow morning there'll be a short session on that, and codes of conduct, which are industry-led. And this is an area where, again, we're going to see some changes, right? So can we talk a little bit about sort of BCR being a compliance program and kind of, how can BCR become certifications? Is this something you are looking into?
Yeah, so the reason why we also decided together in doing a GDPR effort to apply for BCRs is also because that will allow us to review our internal process and policies and make it in a way that shows compliance also to GDPR, because what essentially BCR is requesting a company to do is to make sure that you are protecting data wherever they are within your company. And so it really means, showing GDPR principle globally.
Absolutely.
So that's why I completely agree. Another point, I'm sure we'll talk about this, is also the room for certification. I believe there is room for the industry to certify themselves and closing the gaps that unfortunately GDPR leaves open. It's unfortunate at the same time likely, right? Because there is an opportunity for us to come together as an industry and come up with code of conducts, for example, that will allow us to work efficiently and scalably without being too prescriptive. And face the challenges and the threats that the new technology brings about, which are still to be seen.
And what are the values of GDPR certification, for example, for somebody like Sony Mobile and somebody like Cree? Is this something you would be interested or value? I know you haven't been asked this, but just think aloud.
Yeah. So I actually don't really know right now, because it depends a little bit if this would enable us to more easily establish ourselves at different markets, or maybe create different kinds of business contacts, then of course it would be of value. But yeah, as I said, I have a very, very pragmatic approach to the whole question, and I think the most important thing is that you're doing it right, and the labels and stuff, that's something on top.
Okay.
I agree, the labels is on top, but yeah, perhaps an ISO standard would be useful. It must be measurable, it must be certifiable, it must be repeatable, etc. So same with 9000, same with environmental, etc. So I think, yes, there is room, and GDPR leaves that open, right?
Yeah,
And
it does. And this will be area where I think there's going to be movement. And just for your information, at the moment, Irish Data Protection Commissioner and CNIL have actually issued a consultation, and maybe some of the Scandinavian DPAs will be doing the same on two topics. One is the transparency under GDPR, and the second one is the data transfers. And by the way, particularly they're asking this question whether on certifications as a data transfer mechanism, whether BCR are seen A as a compliance program and B as a certification as well. So those of you who are interested, please go and respond. We at CIPL are responding, have responded, and that will be available on our website so you can see what we have said. But Paul, we've said exactly what you're saying. We need to make this jump between BCR into certification, potentially as well for those who want to do that. Right? Let's talk a little bit about challenges and sanctions and fear of sanctions. What motivates your companies to do the right thing? Is it sanction or is it business enabler, good things about GDPR, or something else, competitive advantage or trust?
I think it's the latter one, is trust. For us, the main point is trust. Well, of course, the fines are a big push, right? Especially if you want to get the right budget and attention. I'm sure the function are a big push, but at the end of the day, it's a matter of trust. The reason why we do it, in fact, funny enough, I don't belong to the legal department. I belong to an organization which is really security and trust within Cisco. And we all look at the all elements of trustworthiness. So trustworthiness in our products, in our security, and privacy and data protection is one of them. Because we truly believe that when you got it right, it's much more rewarding the trust that you get than the fact that you escape fines.
Absolutely. Long-term gains is better than short-term gains. We try to be proactive, we try to be transparent, we try to give users control over their data. Yes, we might not always do it correctly, we might be improving things. And one of the challenges is when you make an improvement in your program, do you go just forward or do you go back and correct things as well? It's always a dilemma every time I introduce a change. Should I go back and change some of the things I've done? Or should I just push forward? Because we're all constrained with resources, right? And it's a big challenge to manage that.
Yeah, for us, it's all about trust. I mean, we work with healthcare, so the data we process is, I would say, the most sensitive data that you can process. And it's like we need that our customers, our patients, they have trust in us. And so the GDPR is, I mean, it's both like externally to show that we really work with these things and take this seriously, but it's also like in the long term, it's an internal tool to be able to because as I mentioned several times before, it's a lot about the doing stuff and then maybe documenting, but in the long run, having like a good process documented enables us to work with data in a more productive way. So if we are not sure of exactly what we're doing, we might take the defensive stance and not do something. But if we are really in control of our processes, we can be at the forefront of productivity.
And thank you for saying that, because I think that is incredibly important. That risk reticence. If we don't have accountability and know what we're doing, we are not going to be using data. We are not going to developing that new product, that new system. We are not going to be serving our customers better. So in a way, I think you're absolutely right. And the accountability does help also with that. Paul, we think Article 29 has just, we know they have published, but not all of us have seen them, the guidance, the internal guidance on application of fines under GDPR. Can you tell us very briefly 2-3 key points that strike you from that guidance?
Sure. Let me start by saying that I'm actually very happy with the responses I've heard here, that so many organizations are not being scaremongered and are focusing on trust and responsibility, because what we see a lot now in the media and in online discussion is the scaremongering. And luckily also the Working Party 29 is trying to move away from that in their guidance on sanctions. What they do, it's only 12 pages, so it's a relatively easy read compared to many of the other opinions, but explain how to go about in issuing a sanction. One of the main things they say is that the monetary fine is not always the right sanction. every sanction needs to be assessed based on the individual case, on the individual circumstances of a contravention. And it could be that a monetary fine is the best sanction. But in the end, issuing a fine or issuing a sanction is all about encouraging compliance. So in many cases, the better sanction would be to instruct a company to modify their data processing operations or to issue a temporary or permanent ban on data processing, which is also allowed under the GDPR, and many people may have missed that. But in my eyes, it's a much more serious sanction if you are instructed to adapt your data processing or even stop it. That might be much more costly, certainly if it's been long-standing processes that suddenly have to be updated.
And in terms of accountability program and being able to verify and demonstrate, what role do you think a company's ability to demonstrate compliance and accountability, that they've got a program, what role would that play in determining sanctions, or type or level of sanction?
Well, it's certainly something that is explicitly mentioned. Also there, the DPAs need to take into account the full circumstances of a case. So including everything that an organization did to prevent wrongdoing, to prevent a contravention. And mistakes are only human. So even if you have the very best privacy program out there, there could still be a data breach. Something could still go wrong, and you could still have a very smart hacker knowing how to circumvent your systems. But the DPAs will need to take into account everything that you've done to prevent that from happening, but also everything you've done to mitigate the consequences of any breach for the individual. So acting as a responsible company, both ahead of something going wrong, but also immediately afterwards, will also influence your sanctions or your potential sanctions. And it could also just be a warning if everything you've done is the way it should have been.
Is that how you see it as well?
Absolutely. I mean, taking corrective actions after a mistake, self-punishing yourself is a good thing. Deleting the data if you did something wrong, I think that's steps you should have in your arsenal and not wait for the regulators to do that for you. If you did something wrong, error on the cautious side, get rid of all the mistakes you did, correct the implementation and move forward in better design. So error on the cautious side, I think that's what I tell developers. If you're not sure, error on the cautious side.
Yeah, be careful. I think it's imperative now, I guess, and I think it's also about taking the GDPR as an opportunity also to build a relationship with your lead data protection authority, because that becomes your guidelines. I mean, if you're not sure and if you have a good relationship, there's nothing wrong in actually exchanging views, especially because even can be also. And that's what I say. We are a true believer within Cisco is that we do have resources and technology that also data protection authorities can leverage to better understand what we're trying to do. So have an open dialogue can also help to build the relationship along the way, so that you don't have to wait for the first complaint to actually trying to remediate.
As somebody has said, you do not want to speak to your lead DPA the first time when there is a complaint or where there is a breach. You want to have that relationship well before. And I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yeah, I mean, we have not discussed internally a lot about these fines and punishments, because no matter the GDPR, we believe too big of a mistake or a breach, there will be no company to fine, because we will be gone, because the trust will be gone and we will be gone. So we're putting the bar very high internally. There's there should be no breach, and we're always this is our goal, and we truly believe that this is such a trust-based thing. It's healthcare. We're a new startup. We're under constant fire from all sides, so there is absolutely no room for mistakes here, no matter the GDPR or not.
Well, listen, we could not finish on a better note than that. And I hope we are out of time. I hope we have tried to convince you that, in fact, being accountable and responsible has got multiple benefits, from business perspective to commercial perspective to, of course, legal and risk aversion perspective, and most importantly, as from trust perspective as well. And despite the previous panel bashing private sector organizations for not doing the right things, I hope we are showing you there are organizations who actually do the right things, and we hope that we continue this dialogue as well. Thank you very much for being with us, and please give our panelists a round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you.